Alright guys, TacticalRab again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. Toronto Ultra looks practically untouchable at Major 1. FaZe certainly couldn't come close to them in either of the two series they played, but Toronto have not played every team in the league so far, and OpTic, Texas and Toronto have not matched up yet so far this season. There have been some questions in terms of the matchups between these teams now they've trended over the last few years, whether OpTic could be a better matchup for Toronto than FaZe turned out to be. OpTic's coach JP believes that based on Scrim results, that could very well be the case when they play, which will happen during Stage 2. Very much interested to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. Plenty to get into today. Firstly, wishing Prestinni the best going forward as he's decided to call it a day with his career. Legendary player, really, of course, world champion in 2019 on the United team with Clay, Simp, aBeZy, and of course Arcetes, his brother. And yes, Prestinni says he's decided to retire. He's gone around a little bit, right? He's been a substitute on FaZe for a little while. He actually played a league match, didn't he, again back in Vanguard when I think Simp was unwell. And yeah, he did pretty well in it, to be fair, but then he was down in challenges, and I'm just sure it's tough to maintain that motivation, right? So Prestinni's decided to hang up the sticks, wishing him the best going forwards. Like, it was always a great guy. When I ran into him, I think it was at a London event a while ago, like, he was always a really great guy to talk to. And of course, a very storied career, kind of famously on that Huntsman team as well, when they played OGLA in the World Championship there. Yeah, sure, it was online, but Prestinni got first blooded on Arklov Peak, but he got the information they're running hella fast down mid, and then Envoy eventually clutches the 1v1 against TJ, which was a very important moment in COD history. But yeah, World Championship ring from 2019, and yeah, just kind of sad to see that so many names such as this are calling it a day in the relatively near past. We saw Sensor step away not really that long ago, and there's been plenty of other players over the last couple of years. But generally speaking, some of the older guards are looking pretty good at this game, right? At least those that are in the Pro League, the accuracies, the Claysters, you know, the Attaches, the Slashers of this world. So I'm not expecting them to disappear anytime soon, but, you know, we'll see how it goes. Wishing them the best going forward. Just quickly, I did see this floating around on some potential roster change that's happening right now. I don't know if this is CDL related precisely, but over the last couple of days, we've discussed Rostermania. Boston have made a change. Thieves have made a change. We're expecting Seattle Surge to make a rather controversial change. The other team in Miami have made a change, of course. The other team that I'd be surprised if they didn't is Vegas, right? At the end of the day, they were top 8 at the major. They got 3-0, you know, they managed to 3-0 Miami somehow with per dropping a 0.4, and then they got reverse swept again out of the tournament, which is what they love to do. They're currently top, I think they're 9th in the league. They only have like 25 points or something, so it's not great for Vegas. It's not like they had a pretty decent stage one or they were in a, you know, World Championship qualification position. They're not. Feels to me they probably need a move. But apparently so far they're not making a move. But maybe this is related to that. You would think Vegas would have to do something. But if this is referring to Vegas, brain dead roster change, then, well, we'll have to see what that turns out to be. This is Vista, by the way, the new map that's arriving into the game very shortly indeed. I don't know if the pros are really going to believe they have the time to test this out and really get to grips with it before Stage 2 begins. They're definitely putting Rio in. They might be putting Rio in for more than one game mode as well. We'll discuss that in a second. These are the bomb locations. These are the hardpoint locations as well. So I guess the ones that aren't, you know, don't have A and B underneath them are the hardpoint locations. Interesting stuff. Surprised there's no hardpoint like over here somewhere. I don't know. I just think the map in general looks good. It looks good to play. The lanes kind of make sense. Whether it works well for hardpoint, I don't know. But some of these hardpoint locations I think could be pretty good. Kind of surprised there isn't one over here where you need to hold more of a back spawn, but there certainly is on this side of the map. So looking forward to seeing Vista in play. And it's a big question over the next couple of days what Rio will come in for, whether it's not just going to be a hardpoint map as well. It was also on this day yesterday last year where JurNii announced his retirement because the Boston Major last year was a little bit later, but of course last year that was Major 2. This year it was Major 1, just because of the way the season cycle has gone. I thought this was pretty funny. I know that Nameless and JurNii are boys, obviously, so they're just joking around here, right? But Nameless's response here, I thought, to JurNii was pretty wild. But there have been some pretty wild stats about OpTic floating around over the last couple of days. Brian Stats is reminiscing on one of his favourite COD teams ever, that legendary OpTic team from COD Ghost, right? Money B, Scum, Clay, and Nadeshot. But have a look at these numbers, right? So OpTic are currently on, as of this most recent tournament, their longest ever tournament drought, which is, maybe it's snuck up on us somewhat, and I think it's definitely more challenging to win events nowadays than it has been in the past. Maybe you can argue that, maybe you can argue the other way. It feels that's the case to some degree. But look, these are the numbers. They last won their event at Major 1 2022 at the start of Vanguard. Since then, there have now been 12 events without a victory. They've made a couple of finals, they've made, a couple of top 3s, but they've not got any further than that, nor have they won an event. Which is, as I say, maybe it's a surprise, maybe it's not a surprise. They went on an 11 streak from 2013-2014, a 10 streak from, Minnesota 20 to Champs 2021, and then of course they won the first event of 2022. But yeah, since then there's been 12 in a row, which I think shows that OpTic have some work to do, but also shows that there is arguably more competition on the other teams in the league now than there's been previously. There's been FaZe winning events, there's been Toronto winning events, of course there's been the Subliners winning events, but OpTic haven't gone there in pretty much 2 years. Of course, that was Scump's last ever victory as a Call of Duty player. So JP Krez, coach of the team, has been discussing lots of things on stream over the last few days. I know that JP, he ends up saying something and you think, Sam, maybe I shouldn't have said that because it's going to get clipped up. JP, at the end of the day, knows how it is. If you're on OpTic, especially if you're making content while under the OpTic brand, whatever you say has a potential to get clipped up and put on the Reddit, and we're probably going to talk about it on the channel. It is how it works. And as JP says, starts to stream, how are the scrims, who do you scrim against? And JP's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't respond to these guys anymore. About to say we got slapped around, 100-point club every map, didn't win around a controller, just so they'll stop asking me these questions. But JP did give some comment on the potential Ultra OpTic rivalry. That's been a phenomenal kind of storyline in general, regardless of the players over the last several years. Ultra versus OpTic, even way back to Cold War, was really a bogey team of OpTic during that season. Pretty much every single year apart from Vanguard, Toronto has had OpTic's number in some respects. Vanguard was a different story, it was the other way around, but often you'll see in the league that certain players and certain teams will just match up well against each other. Historically, it was definitely a thing over the last couple of years when OpTic would always beat FaZe, FaZe would always beat Ultra, but then Ultra would tend to beat OpTic as well. And Thieves were also in this kind of circle, but they kind of, the Thieves victories and losses tended to change somewhat over the course of a season. Sometimes they'd be crushing FaZe, sometimes they'd be losing to FaZe, but it was quite a common thing where certain teams just match up very well against other teams, and it seems so far we've got some evidence of that with FaZe crushing or getting crushed by Ultra both times they've played them, because Ultra's respawn is better than FaZe's, but their search and destroy seemingly was significantly better than FaZe's, which is maybe what was causing some of that discrepancy. However, if you apply that same logic to the OpTic series, you'd say, well, of course, Ultra better search and destroy than OpTic. It'd be a no-brainer, and their respawns marginally better, so easy Toronto win. Which is probably true, but we just don't know. And we have seen in previous games that for whatever reason, when matching up against certain teams, it just works well. And certain players just have a knack to be able to deal with certain styles that other teams don't necessarily. So until they play, we won't really 100% know exactly what this is going to be, but this is what JP has to say on a couple of different topics.
Is Rio just going to be a hardpoint map in the next stage? I believe teams might be scrimming it for S&D. I'm not sure about control yet, but I think it could. If from what I've been hearing that it's good in S&D, then it maybe could be added for search too. Because they got full held last time. Hello JP, can I ask you a question? If you can answer, of course, since you guys stream Ultra a lot past Major, did you guys match up well against them in those scrims? Yeah, dude, we would always battle against Ultra. It'd always be back and forth. So that's why I think we match up better against them than FaZe does, I guess. Or we would have to see in a LAN match, but at least in our scrims, we would match up well against them. What are the differences in your roles? I mean, we kind of do the same thing. I probably bring more analytical stuff, but he brings a little bit more I don't know, what do you call it? Game knowledge stuff, or stuff that I can't do because I had never played at the pro level, but he can relate to. Does that make sense? Advice in that way. Situational stuff will be both of us, but more advice to players that he would give if he were playing, if that makes sense.
So Toronto were no doubt the class of the field at the first major. Like, the dominance was pretty unprecedented for a first event of the season, losing 0 hardpoint all tournament, losing 0 search and destroys all tournament, but they never played OpTic. That matchup never happened. OpTic played FaZe a couple of times, lost pretty close series on both occasions. The respawns were definitely close. The search and destroys, I think it felt like FaZe won those series more comfortably than they did in hindsight, just because the search and destroys were kind of comfortable, but you know, in the respawn modes, OpTic was certainly closer, and we know that OpTic need to work on their search and destroy. That's been a big talking point of the last couple of days. But JP says based on their practice results, he feels like they play Ultra better than they play FaZe. To be fair, maybe that's a lot of respawn analysis. And in search and destroy, maybe it would be a different story, because I don't know how often these top teams scrim each other in search necessarily. I'm guessing maybe it happens, but probably not as frequently as they scrim in the respawn modes. But it was a question, right? Scrappy, though, has said somewhat otherwise, I think. I think he's mentioned that in their scrims, FaZe are the team that's played them the closest. So I'm not sure Scrappy is convinced with the idea that, well, OpTic would be a closer matchup for them were they to play. But maybe from what OpTic have experienced, when they play FaZe in scrims, when they play Toronto in scrims, they might feel like they match up better against Ultra than either FaZe do, or they at least match up better against Ultra than they do right now against FaZe. But I think, again, that is somewhat game mode dependent. The reality is we're simply not going to know until these two teams actually play against each other. My feeling was, going into that Championship Sunday of the event, that nobody bar FaZe was going to be able to touch Toronto, and I still stand by that opinion. I think in a best of 5 series, I highly doubt, based on, at least in terms of what they showed at the major, if they actually played at the major, I think it was, to be honest, I think it was all Toronto all the way. Like, the level of COD that was being played there was an entirely different level. But, you know, maybe OpTic feel differently, and it would be incredibly exciting for the league if, like, Ultra always had FaZe's number, but OpTic always had Ultra's number, and maybe FaZe always has OpTic's number, or something like that, right? It's kind of like a circle that goes around when, generally speaking, the team works in a certain matchup, so you never really know who's going to come out on top of a tournament. That's very exciting, and so far, FaZe have kind of shown that they seem to have the leg up on OpTic. We don't really know what that relationship exists like elsewhere. And you would think at some point that the New York Subliners would come back into this picture. But, you know, for now, that doesn't really seem to be the case. This, by the way, is March the 10th. So before the major begins, these are the next set of matches that are upcoming here. So these are all the games, and there's several weekends of qualifiers, as you might expect. But Toronto OpTic is a game that is played right about here, March the 10th, which is not far before the major. So yeah, just like a weekend and a bit before the major. The final game is OpTic versus Subliners before the major. But yeah, OpTic Toronto is a matchup. So we will get to see some evidence of this if the teams, when they play this game, are still at the kind of level that they seem to be at the moment. But certainly, I think whoever they play against, Toronto will be a challenging team to stop, especially when you look at some of the Lion Man cards from the stage and you see numbers like this with all of the Toronto guys in the top 10, even in the top 9, which is pretty, I wouldn't say it's unprecedented, but when FaZe have dominated tournaments in the past, quite often it's Simp, aBeZy, Cell, all in the top, you know, however many players, and then Arstees is like a 80 rated or a 75 rated, or whatever, right, or whoever the player was. That's kind of how it would sometimes go. This year it's a bit different for FaZe, but it's also a bit different for Toronto, right? And yeah, even Sib and Skyz get on here, Pred gets on here, but the rest of it is kind of filled out by the players that came top 2 at the most recent events. But very much interested in your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.